In the midst of a routine flight, one impulsive act shatters the fragile calm of the cabin. Elena's defiant slap unveils deep-seated prejudice and ignites a battle against an unjust system. Now, every heartbeat echoes with the promise of change as the fight for truth takes flight. Watch until the end to see how this incredible story unfolds, and let us know what time you're watching today. The airport at dawn felt as if it were suspended in a quiet, secret world. The early light, soft and pale, danced across the empty runways, while the cool air whispered hints of untold stories. An airplane stood on the tarmac, its sleek body outlined against a sky that promised both hope and uncertainty. Inside the plane's cabin, darkness still held sway, broken only by the occasional murmur of early passengers and the soft, methodical footsteps of Elena. As she moved down the narrow aisle, checking every detail with careful precision, there was an unmistakable weight in her eyes, a blend of determination and a hidden worry that she could not shake. Elena had always taken pride in her work. As a flight attendant, she was known for her calm presence and impeccable service. Yet today, there was something different about her, a quiet storm that simmered just beneath her composed exterior. With every step, she recalled a past filled with moments when duty clashed with the stirring of her conscience. She remembered times when a small act of defiance had cost her dearly, and though she had learned to bury those memories under layers of professionalism, they still lingered like shadows in the back of her mind. Across the aisle, Marcus settled into his seat near the window. His dark eyes, full of both sorrow and quiet strength, took in the scene with measured calm. He was a man who carried his history in the subtle lines of his face, his silence speaking volumes about battles fought and challenges endured. The soft glow of the cabin lights revealed hints of a life marked by resilience, a life where dignity was hard-won, and every moment was a quiet act of survival. As he gazed out at the slowly brightening horizon, Marcus seemed lost in thought, as if he were weighing the promise of a day against the burdens of his past. The engine's gentle hum began to grow, a soft vibration that filled the cabin with a sense of awakening. Outside, the world stirred as the first rays of the sun broke through the darkness, casting long, dancing shadows on the ground. Inside, a delicate tension began to weave through the silence, a sense that the routine of air travel was about to be disrupted by forces both seen and unseen. Elena's eyes briefly caught a flicker of discontent on the face of a man seated several rows ahead, a small crease that hinted at inner turmoil. She made a silent note of it, her instincts alert to every subtle sign in her confined world. In that moment, the plane became a stage for a drama that had been unfolding long before the flight began. Every detail, the interplay of light and shadow, the hushed murmurs of passengers, even the soft creak of the seatbelts, contributed to an atmosphere of quiet suspense. Elena's thoughts drifted to the countless flights where order had been maintained and where every smile and gentle word had been a promise of safety. But today, the promise seemed fragile, as if a single misstep could shatter the delicate peace that held them together. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Elena's mind wandered to memories of past journeys. She recalled the moments when a simple act, a kind word, a small gesture, had felt like a rebellion against an unyielding order. There had been times when standing up for what was right had come with a heavy price, and even now, as she moved with practiced grace, she felt the echo of those choices in her heart. The soft aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the galley mingled with the sterile scent of disinfectant, creating a bittersweet reminder of the normalcy she strived to preserve amidst the uncertainty. Marcus, too, was not immune to the pull of memory. The quiet hum of the air conditioning, the rhythmic beeps of instruments, and the occasional click of a seatbelt formed a steady backdrop to his thoughts. He wondered if today might mark a turning point, a day when long-held tensions would surface, altering the fragile balance between order and chaos. His eyes, steady and full of quiet resolve, spoke of a man who had weathered many storms, and as he looked out the window, he seemed to brace himself for whatever lay ahead. Outside, the sun climbed higher, its light growing bolder as it chased away the remnants of night. The airplane, now lined up for takeoff, exuded a sense of both promise and forewarning. Each passenger, from the youngest traveler to the most weathered soul, felt an unspoken anticipation, a shared feeling that the journey would be unlike any other. Elena's heart pounded a quiet rhythm as she moved to her station, each step a silent declaration of readiness despite the inner conflict that tugged at her. She was a guardian of the fragile peace within these metal walls, and every act of service was a careful balance between duty and the stirring of her deeper beliefs. In the final moments before the aircraft began its ascent, a subtle but profound exchange took place. Elena's eyes met Marcus's for just a heartbeat, and in that brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them. It was a recognition of shared humanity, a fleeting connection that transcended the boundaries of their roles and backgrounds. For Elena, that glance held a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in a world fraught with division, there existed the possibility of empathy and change. Marcus, with his calm dignity, returned the look with a measured nod, acknowledging the unspoken promise that their lives were intertwined by more than mere circumstance. As the plane's wheels lifted from the ground and the roar of the engines filled the cabin, the world outside receded into a tapestry of clouds and light. The delicate calm of the early morning gave way to the tumult of flight, carrying with it the hopes, fears, and secret battles of all on board. In that suspended moment between earth and sky, the unfolding journey promised revelations that would test the very essence of who they were. Every sound, every glance, every beat of the heart was a note in the symphony of a day that would soon change everything. The flight had just begun, but already the air was thick with the potential for conflict and the weight of unspoken truths. In the quiet hum of the ascent, as the airplane sailed higher into the unknown, both Elena and Marcus felt the stirring of fate, a silent signal that the day ahead would challenge the delicate balance between duty and conscience, between order and the raw, unpredictable forces of the human heart. Elena moved gracefully down the narrow aisle, her steady footsteps echoing softly in the cabin as she began her routine checks. Each movement was precise, yet inside her, memories stirred like restless ghosts. From a young age, she had learned that life rarely offered clear choices. Duty and conscience often clashed in silent battles. Tonight, as the airplane cut through a sky streaked with the early hues of dawn, those battles raged anew. Elena's heart pulsed with determination. Her goal was simple yet profound, to ensure that every passenger felt safe, cared for, and respected during the flight. Yet beneath that calm exterior lay a simmering tension, a desire to challenge an order that sometimes felt too rigid to embrace the messy truths of the real world. Marcus sat by the window, his gaze fixed on the receding ground below. His face was a quiet canvas of endurance and unspoken sorrow. Each time he glanced around the cabin, he saw reflections of a past marked by struggles against prejudice, a past where judgments were cast without mercy. His eyes, though calm, burned with the weight of experiences that few could imagine. Marcus had grown up in a world that often saw him not for who he was, but for the color of his skin. And while he had learned to shield himself with quiet strength, the scars of old wounds still throbbed beneath his composed exterior. He had boarded countless flights, each one a reminder of both hope and hardship, yet he remained steadfast, a silent pillar of resilience amid shifting tides. Between the hum of the engines and the low murmur of conversations, the cabin seemed to pulse with the energy of unspoken stories. Elena's mind drifted back to her early days when she first learned the ropes. Back then, every smile she offered, every polite nod, was a small act of rebellion against a world that demanded perfection. Over the years, she had come to see her role not merely as a servant of routine, but as a guardian of small kindnesses. Her inner resolve had grown with each flight, yet so had the burden of secrets she carried, memories of times when the rules had forced her to look away from injustice. Now, as she moved through the rows, that burden felt particularly heavy. She longed for a day when compassion would override convention, when a gentle act could disrupt a cycle of indifference. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft sigh from Marcus, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. In that silent exchange, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of shared humanity, a recognition that both had, in their own ways, borne the weight of a world that often seemed unjust. Elena saw in his eyes a reflection of her own quiet discontent, a spark of hope that perhaps their paths were intertwined by fate. Marcus, in turn, recognized a familiar pain in her steady gaze, a hint of inner turmoil masked by the calm of a professional smile. In that fragile moment, Elena's initial goal crystallized further. She aimed to maintain the semblance of order expected of her, yet a part of her yearned to do more, to break through the confines of protocol and make a stand for fairness. It was a dangerous ambition in a world where rules were absolute and any deviation could lead to dire consequences. She recalled a time when her empathy had led her to act against orders, a decision that had haunted her ever since. The memory was both a warning and a promise, a reminder that courage was often found in the unlikeliest of choices, even if it came at a personal cost. Marcus, seated quietly, gathered his own strength as the flight continued. Every sound, from the gentle hum of the ventilation to the intermittent clatter of seat belts, served as a reminder of the precarious balance between order and chaos. His life had taught him that moments of calm could hide storms waiting to break loose, and he braced himself for the inevitable challenges ahead. The subtle tension in the cabin was not lost on him. He had long learned to sense the undercurrents of conflict, those barely perceptible shifts in the air that hinted at trouble. Today, that intuition whispered to him that the journey would test more than just the mechanics of flight. It would test the very hearts of those on board. The interplay between Elena and Marcus deepened as the minutes passed. In casual interactions, a shared glance as she refilled a cup of coffee in the galley, a brief conversation when she adjusted his seatbelt, a quiet understanding began to form. Elena sensed that Marcus was more than just another passenger. He was a man shaped by struggles and defined by resilience. His gentle manner and measured words spoke of a past filled with both hardship and quiet victories. For Elena, each encounter with him was a reminder of the silent battles waged by those who, like her, fought for dignity in a world too often governed by cold rules and harsh judgments. As the cabin lights dimmed to signal the transition into a more subdued mode of service, Elena's internal conflict took center stage. The rules of her profession were clear, yet her heart rebelled the thought of enforcing them blindly. She had always believed that every gesture of kindness mattered, and that sometimes a simple act could speak louder than the strict commands of protocol. But she also knew that the structure of the airline was unyielding. Her superiors expected perfection, a facade of calm and unassailable professionalism that left no room for the messy, real emotions of everyday life. In a quiet moment away from prying eyes, Elena recalled a conversation from her past, a memory of a mentor who had once told her, "In a world of rules, let your heart be your guide." Those words had lingered, a constant source of comfort and conflict. They reminded her that while duty was essential, the soul of a person could never be confined by checklists and standard procedures. Today, as she glanced at Marcus, she wondered if the rigid lines drawn by authority could ever accommodate the complexities of human experience. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. To follow her heart meant risking everything, a risk that could shatter the fragile balance she had so carefully maintained. Marcus, too, faced his own inner struggles. His quiet strength was built on years of resilience, but the cost of that resilience was often a deep-seated weariness. The flight was more than a journey through the skies. It was a reminder of the battles he had fought off the ground, of the prejudices that had chipped away at his spirit over time. Yet in his quiet determination, there was also a spark of defiance, a belief that each day held the possibility of change. His eyes, reflecting both pain and hope, met Elena's repeatedly, as if in silent dialogue. In those brief moments, he too wondered if the rigid structures of society could be reshaped by the power of compassion and mutual understanding. As the flight continued its steady course, the interplay of personalities and motivations began to hint at the greater conflict to come. Elena's internal war between duty and empathy, and Marcus's quiet struggle against a world that had never fully accepted him, set the stage for a confrontation that was both inevitable and unpredictable. The air in the cabin grew thick with unspoken questions, with the promise of a storm that might soon break the delicate peace. In the interplay of light and shadow, of whispered hopes and unvoiced fears, both Elena and Marcus stood at the threshold of a new chapter, a chapter that would force them to confront not only the rules that govern their lives, but also the deep, unyielding truths of their own hearts. In that suspended moment, as the aircraft sailed on through an endless expanse of sky, the seeds of conflict had been sown. Elena's determination to do what was right, even if it meant bending the rules, and Marcus's quiet resolve to stand tall in the face of injustice, would soon collide in a way that neither could have foreseen. Their stories, intertwined in the confines of a single flight, were poised to unravel a tapestry of emotion, challenge, and transformation, a tapestry where every act of defiance and every silent acceptance carried the weight of a world in flux. The calm of the flight was suddenly shattered when a heated murmur began to ripple through the cabin. Just minutes after the aircraft had settled into its cruising altitude, a tense energy gripped the space. Elena moved through the narrow aisle, her mind still caught in a delicate balance between duty and a desire to challenge injustice. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment that was about to unfold. It began with a soft, almost imperceptible murmur from a group of passengers seated near the rear. A disagreement, sparked by a misunderstanding, was quickly escalating beyond mere words. Elena had noticed earlier how the quiet murmur of discontent was woven into the background of the flight. Now, that murmur grew into sharp whispers and unsettled glances. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing in as she approached the troubled area, her heart hammering in her chest. Marcus, sitting near the window, had maintained his calm demeanor throughout the flight. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of unease as he sensed the tension building around him. He had long learned that even on a peaceful flight, an undercurrent of conflict could emerge at any moment. Yet he remained quiet, his thoughts lost in the steady hum of the engines and the soft tapping of the seatbelt sign. As Elena neared the commotion, a voice rang out, a voice laced with accusation and frustration. A passenger, whose face was flushed with anger, pointed a trembling finger in Marcus's direction. "You think you're above the rules, don't you?" the passenger shouted. The tone was sharp, and it carried a weight of prejudice that stung like a physical blow. In that instant, the atmosphere turned electric, and every eye in the cabin was fixed on the unfolding scene. Elena's instincts surged as she stepped closer. She had been trained to handle such disputes with calm assurance, to mediate and soothe frayed nerves. Yet, in the sudden flare of hostility, her internal conflict roiled. Memories of past moments when she had stood up for what was right, even against the unyielding tide of authority, rushed back to her. Her heart pounded with an emotion she had long tried to keep in check, a blend of protectiveness and a fierce determination to fight against injustice. But in that critical moment, her training and her personal demons collided. Marcus looked up, his eyes wide with surprise and hurt. There was no warning in his expression, only a deep, troubled sadness mixed with confusion. The angry passenger's words had cut through the calm facade of the flight, and now Elena felt an intense surge of protective anger. The rules that governed her every action whispered caution in her ear, but something deeper urged her to act. In that split second, Elena made a choice, one that would shatter the fragile peace of the journey. Before she could fully register what was happening, a flash of motion occurred. In a heartbeat, Elena raised her hand, and with an intensity that startled everyone around, she struck Marcus across the face. The sound of the slap echoed in the sudden silence of the cabin, a sharp punctuation in a moment that had already teetered on the edge of chaos. Time seemed to slow as gasps and murmurs filled the air. Marcus's head jerked to the side, and his eyes filled with disbelief and pain. The shock was palpable, and even the angry passenger fell silent, as if the intensity of the act had swallowed every other sound. For Elena, the act was both a release and a burden. In that singular moment, the anger and conflict that had built up within her erupted in a way she could neither control nor fully comprehend. The slap was a physical manifestation of the internal war she had waged for so long, a desperate attempt to silence the prejudices that had haunted her and those around her. Yet, as quickly as it happened, the reality of the moment set in. Elena's heart pounded, and a cold dread began to seep into her bones as she realized the gravity of her action. Almost immediately, the calm of routine was irrevocably lost. Within moments, a commanding voice broke through the shocked silence of the cabin. Her boss, a stern figure whose face was etched with disappointment and authority, stepped forward. His eyes, hard and unyielding, locked onto Elena as he spoke in a tone that brooked no argument. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an unyielding institution. "Your actions are unacceptable." The words were delivered with a finality that left no room for explanation or defense. Elena's mind raced, her thoughts a chaotic mix of regret, defiance, and the burning need to justify what she had done. But before she could muster a reply, her boss's decision was made clear with a swift, cold efficiency. "You are relieved of your duties," he declared, leaving no doubt that her career was over in that instant. The fallout was immediate and irreversible. The other passengers, once caught in their own private worlds, now exchanged looks of shock, disbelief, and even fear. Some reached for their phones to capture the moment, while others whispered among themselves about the sudden and dramatic turn of events. The cabin, once a confined space of routine travel, had become a stage for a moment that would ripple far beyond the flight itself. Marcus, still reeling from the unexpected blow, touched his cheek where the sting of the slap lingered. His eyes, now filled with a mix of pain and quiet anger, sought answers that would never come. In that brief exchange of glances between him and Elena before the slap, there had been a promise of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity. Now that promise lay shattered on the floor of the aircraft, replaced by the bitter taste of betrayal and injustice. For Elena, the repercussions of that moment would extend far beyond the immediate shock. As she stood there, the echo of her action reverberated in every corner of the plane. The slap had been a spark in a powder keg of unresolved conflicts, a small act that had unleashed a torrent of consequences. Deep down, she knew that this single moment of defiance would be scrutinized, debated, and remembered as the turning point of her life. It was as if the flight, once a symbol of escape and routine, had transformed into a crucible of judgment and retribution. In the silence that followed her boss's decree, Elena felt the weight of the world settle on her shoulders. The faces of the passengers, the lingering shock in Marcus's eyes, and the stern gaze of her boss, all of it formed a tapestry of consequences that would not soon be forgotten. Outside, the aircraft continued its journey through the endless expanse of sky, but within its walls, time had come to standstill, each second marked by the heavy burden of regret and the looming threat of a future filled with turmoil. As the flight progressed, small details began to reveal hints of a larger conflict waiting on the horizon. A whispered conversation in the galley hinted at investigations to come, and a furtive glance exchanged between two passengers spoke of an awareness that this incident was only a symptom of deeper, systemic issues. The slap had been a catalyst, a violent rupture in the carefully maintained facade of order and professionalism. It was a moment that promised to expose the fractures in the system, a system that was as rigid as it was indifferent. In the midst of the chaos, Elena's mind churned with 1,000 conflicting emotions. There was regret, yes, but also a stubborn sense of righteousness that had driven her to act in the first place. The internal conflict that had always defined her was now laid bare, and as she faced the inevitable fallout, she realized that her journey was far from over. The incident had ignited a spark that would force her to confront not only her own demons, but also the broader issues of injustice and prejudice that permeated the world around her. In the minutes that followed, as the cabin slowly settled into a tense, uneasy quiet, every sound, the murmur of voices, the hum of the engines, even the soft tapping of a seatbelt, seemed charged with significance. Each beat of the heart echoed with the promise of change, of a reckoning that was both personal and universal. The disruptive event had set the stage for a larger conflict, one that would draw in every character on board and force them to confront the hidden truths of their own lives. And so, with a single fateful slap, the delicate balance of the flight was shattered, propelling Elena into a journey from which there would be no easy return. The seeds of a far greater battle had been sown, and as the aircraft sailed on through the vast, indifferent sky, each passenger carried with them the unspoken knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. Elena sat in a quiet corner of the airport lounge, the echo of her actions still reverberating in her mind. The announcement that she was fired had come like a death knell, shattering her carefully maintained world. Her initial goal, to safeguard and nurture every passenger's trust, was now buried under a mountain of regret and institutional rigidity. The reality of her impulsive act weighed heavily on her, and as she stared blankly at the muted colors of the terminal walls, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. In the hours that followed the incident, the airport transformed from a bustling hub of transit into a silent tribunal of judgment. Elena's thoughts swirled like autumn leaves caught in an unexpected gust of wind. Each face in the crowd, each hurried step of a traveler, seemed to mirror the chaos inside her. The cold fluorescent lights above did nothing to dispel the chill that had taken residence in her heart. She replayed the moment over and over, the flash of anger, the desperate need to act, and then the irrevocable sound of a slap that had ruptured more than just the fragile peace of that flight. A voice broke through her introspection. "Elena!" It was Amir, a colleague she had known for years, whose concern shone in his eyes. His presence was a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness of her thoughts. Amir had always been the calm, steady force on board, the one who balanced the delicate interplay of rules and human compassion. He pulled a chair near her, his gentle tone laced with empathy, as he began, "I know you feel cornered by what happened. But it's not the end. There are things we need to look at, both within the system and within ourselves." His words, though soft, carried the weight of experience and a promise of solidarity. Elena listened, her eyes moist with unshed tears. She admitted, voice trembling, "I acted out of anger and hurt. I wanted to stand up against the prejudice that Marcus has suffered all his life, but now I see I have destroyed the very thing I wanted to protect." Her confession was raw and honest, echoing Amir's own struggles with the system's cold indifference. He nodded slowly, acknowledging that the delicate balance between duty and conscience was often disrupted by the very act of trying to enforce justice in an unjust world. As they spoke, the airport buzzed with murmurs of the incident. Journalists, drawn by the dramatic turn of events, had begun to gather near the check-in counters. One reporter, a determined young woman with a keen eye for injustice, introduced herself as Layla. She approached Amir and Elena, her notebook and recorder in hand, and asked, "Can you tell me what truly happened on that flight? The world deserves to know the truth." Her tone was measured, respectful, yet imbued with an urgency that suggested this was more than a simple news story. It was a spark that could ignite a broader debate on rights and prejudice. Amir exchanged a glance with Elena, silently urging her to speak. With a shaky breath, she recounted the events, the subtle buildup of tension in the cabin, the charged atmosphere that had led her to act impulsively, and the haunting realization that her attempt to defend Marcus had resulted in an irreversible breach of protocol. "I just couldn't stand by and watch the injustice anymore," she whispered, the words both a confession and a cry for understanding. Layla's eyes flickered with determination as she scribbled notes, her presence transforming the quiet corner of the terminal into a makeshift stage for truth. Meanwhile, across the terminal, Marcus was grappling with his own set of obstacles. Having been a silent victim of prejudice long before this flight, his hurt was now compounded by betrayal. He had not expected violence from someone who, for a fleeting moment, had shared an unspoken bond of understanding. In a secluded seating area, he met with a trusted friend, Nadia, who had witnessed his struggles over the years. Nadia, known for her quiet activism and unwavering support for those marginalized by society, placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Marcus, I know you faced a lifetime of being judged by your skin, but this is too much," she murmured, her voice a blend of sorrow and fierce resolve. Her words reminded Marcus that he was not alone. While the physical blow had left him reeling, the emotional aftermath was even more complex. His pain was interwoven with the recognition that the flight had exposed the raw underbelly of a system that refused to see him as a person. The incident was fast becoming a symbol of a larger conflict, a confrontation between the rigid structures of authority and the messy, often painful truth of human existence. Back with Elena, Amir's quiet counsel slowly began to form a counterpoint to the overwhelming despair. He spoke of a growing network of individuals who believed that the system needed change, a network that spanned from sympathetic colleagues to impassioned activists like Layla. "This isn't just about one incident," he said softly. "It's about exposing the fractures in a system that values order over humanity. You've ignited something that cannot be ignored." His words planted a seed of resolve in Elena, even as she battled the weight of her actions. The reporter's presence had stirred more than just public curiosity. Soon, whispers of union meetings and protests began to surface in quiet corners of the terminal. Fellow flight attendants, who had long felt stifled by an inflexible corporate hierarchy, expressed their support for Elena. They saw in her the embodiment of a struggle they had internalized for years, the need to stand up against an impersonal system that ignored the nuances of human experience. One senior attendant, a woman with decades of service and a deep, whether compassion, confided to a small group, "Sometimes the rules are designed to silence our hearts." What Elena did was wrong in the eyes of the company, but perhaps it's right in the eyes of those who've suffered silently. As the day wore on, the initial shock of the incident began to give way to a complex tapestry of alliances and confrontations. Elena was faced with an obstacle that challenged not only her personal goals, but also the very foundation of the corporate order. Her dream of being a guardian of kindness had been undermined by the very system that demanded conformity and silence. Now, with her future uncertain and her conscience tormented, she was forced to question everything: the nature of duty, the limits of authority, and the possibility of change within a structure built on rigid hierarchies. The airport had become a microcosm of the wider world, where injustice and compassion, rigidity and rebellion coexisted in a tense, volatile balance. Elena's journey, which had begun as a routine flight, was now spiraling into a maelstrom of personal and social conflict. Every conversation with Amir, every exchange with Layla, and every supportive word from her fellow attendants deepened the complexity of her situation. Each interaction was a reminder that the obstacles she now faced were not insurmountable walls, but challenges that could lead to transformation if met with courage and unity. In the midst of the rising chaos, Elena's eyes met Amir's once again. In his steady gaze, she found a glimmer of hope, a silent promise that she was not alone in this battle. Even as the weight of her mistake threatened to crush her spirit, the network of voices around her spoke of resilience and the possibility of redemption. The disruptive events of the flight had set in motion a chain of reactions that would force everyone involved to confront the deeper issues at play. The obstacle was clear: the unyielding corporate system and the societal prejudices that it both enforced and concealed. And as Elena sat there, torn between regret and a newfound resolve, she knew that her journey was only beginning. The turning point had arrived, marked by the collision of personal guilt and collective indignation. In that moment, Elena realized that to reclaim her sense of purpose, she would have to navigate a treacherous path. A path that demanded not only the courage to face the consequences of her actions, but also the determination to fight for a system that recognized the value of human decency over blind adherence to rules. The challenge ahead was daunting, and the stakes were higher than ever, but in the shared glances of those who believed in a kinder, fairer world, Elena found the strength to continue. And so, with a heavy heart and a resolute spirit, she prepared to confront the obstacle that now lay before her, a challenge that would test her limits and reshape the destiny of everyone touched by that fateful flight. The airport lounge was alive with whispers and the heavy pulse of unresolved tension. Outside, rain fell steadily against the vast glass walls, each droplet echoing the beat of anxious hearts. Inside, the air felt thick, as if every soul carried the weight of the flight's explosive events. Elena sat alone on a worn bench, the cool metal beneath her fingers grounding her as she tried to make sense of the chaos that had erupted earlier. The incident, the shocking slap, the immediate firing, and the ripple of emotions that followed had shaken not only her world, but that of everyone present. Amir soon joined her, his face etched with quiet determination. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her, and in the soft murmur of the lounge, their shared silence spoke volumes. "Elena," he began, his voice gentle yet laced with urgency, "today was not just about one act. It's a mirror reflecting the deep wounds that have long festered in this system." His words hung between them as the steady patter of rain and the distant hum of overhead announcements blended into a somber symphony. Across the room, Layla, the determined reporter who had been following every twist of the incident, had gathered a small group of curious onlookers. Her eyes darted around, capturing every detail as she prepared to reveal what she had discovered. With a quiet intensity, she addressed the small crowd. "I have documents, internal emails, and even witness testimonies that show this isn't an isolated event. Our airline has a long, painful history, of sidelining voices that speak up against injustice." Her words struck the gathered passengers and staff like shards of broken glass, each piece catching the light of truth in its own jagged way. The revelation brought an electrifying hush over the lounge. People leaned in closer, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of mobile screens and the flickering overhead lights. Some exchanged worried glances, while others, emboldened by the news, whispered fervently about change. The murmurs of discontent swelled, reverberating off the walls and mingling with the sound of the relentless rain outside. In the midst of this brewing storm, Marcus emerged from the shadows of the seating area. His eyes, still clouded with the pain of the earlier assault, now burned with a renewed sense of purpose. Stepping forward, he addressed the crowd in a measured, firm tone. "I have lived my entire life under the burden of prejudice. Today, what happened on that flight was not just about me. It is a symbol of a much larger injustice." He paused, letting his words sink in. The murmur of the gathering crowd grew louder, as if drawn together by the magnetic pull of his conviction. Marcus revealed that he had been quietly collecting evidence of discriminatory practices within the airline, evidence that spanned years and affected countless passengers. "There are records," he continued, "that show patterns of neglect, mistreatment, and bias. I am not alone in this struggle." His declaration, filled with raw emotion, resonated deeply with those who had felt marginalized or unheard. The atmosphere shifted palpably as alliances began to form in the space between hope and outrage. Amir, who had long been a quiet supporter of change within the airline, nodded in agreement. "We have always known that something was wrong," he said softly, glancing at Elena. "Today we stand at a crossroads. Do we allow this broken system to continue, or do we come together to demand something better?" His words, like the steady drumming of rain on the window, filled the room with a persistent, rhythmic hope. But as the crowd swelled with unified voices calling for accountability, a countercurrent of dissent began to emerge. A senior manager, whose face had remained hidden behind a facade of corporate calm, stepped into the light. His expression was a mask of stern authority, and his voice, when it cut through the murmurs, was cold and unyielding. "This is not the time for insurrection," he declared. "Our procedures are in place for a reason. What happened today was an aberration, not a trend." His words, intended to restore order, instead fanned the flames of discontent. The manager's statement, devoid of empathy, only deepened the rift between those who demanded justice and those who clung to institutional protocols. In that charged moment, the symbolism of the space became impossible to ignore. The rain outside, relentless and unremitting, served as a mirror to the cleansing yet tumultuous forces of change. The lounge's reflective surfaces, smeared by droplets, symbolized a fractured mirror of society, each ripple a distortion of truth, yet together hinting at a larger, unifying picture waiting to be restored. Elena felt her heart pound as she absorbed the unfolding confrontation. The alliances forming around her, the brave declarations of those who had long been silenced, stirred something deep within her. She had once been overwhelmed by guilt and regret, paralyzed by the consequences of her own rash actions. Now, facing the raw power of collective truth, she sensed the first stirrings of personal growth. In the steady, unwavering eyes of Marcus and the quiet resolve of Amir, she saw the potential for redemption, a chance to transform her mistake into a catalyst for change. The scene took on an almost surreal quality as more faces joined the chorus of dissent. A group of fellow flight attendants, once intimidated by the rigid hierarchies of their profession, stepped forward in solidarity. Their voices, soft at first but gradually gaining strength, challenged the manager's cold assertions. "We cannot ignore the pain and the truth," one attendant said, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. "Every rule we follow must be measured against the lives it affects. Today we choose humanity over indifference." Amir's steady hand on Elena's shoulder lent her a sense of quiet reassurance. "Change is never easy," he whispered, "but every revolution begins with a single, honest act." His words, simple yet profound, resonated as deeply as the steady cadence of rain that underscored the tension in the room. As the confrontation escalated, the sensory details of the moment grew more vivid. The aroma of damp coats and stale coffee mingled with the sharp tang of tension in the air. Every sound, the low murmur of determined voices, the rapid shuffle of feet on tiled floors, and the persistent, rhythmic pattern of rain, wove together into a tapestry of revolution. The once sterile environment of the airport lounge now felt charged with a raw, palpable energy. Betrayals, too, began to surface in subtle ways. A few managers who had once been seen as impartial were now caught between loyalty to their institution and their growing recognition of its failings. Their furtive glances and whispered conversations betrayed a conflict of conscience. In one quiet exchange near the back of the lounge, a mid-level supervisor confessed, "I have seen the evidence, and I cannot ignore it any longer. We are all complicit if we do nothing." Such confessions, though whispered, added layers of complexity to the unfolding drama, deepening the interpersonal dynamics among all present. In that moment of heightened stakes, Elena felt a transformation take root within her. The shame and self-doubt that had once paralyzed her began to give way to a burning resolve. She stood slowly, her eyes meeting those of her supporters with a newfound clarity. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling yet determined, "but I will not let that mistake define me. I am ready to fight for a system that sees us all as human." Her declaration, simple and sincere, sent ripples through the room, reinforcing the collective desire for change. As the rain continued its steady drum outside, the internal storm within the lounge reached a fever pitch. The boundaries between right and wrong, duty and conscience, blurred beneath the weight of undeniable truth. In that charged atmosphere, every person present was forced to confront not only the flaws in institution, but also the potential for renewal that lay within each individual act of courage. In the end, the midpoint of this unfolding saga was marked by a convergence of personal growth, raw emotion, and the unmistakable call for justice. The revelation of long-hidden truths and the passionate confrontation between those seeking to uphold a rigid order and those daring to challenge it had shifted the balance irrevocably. The airport lounge, with its rain-soaked windows and echoing voices, had become a crucible where old ways were being melted down, making way for something new and hopeful. A future where every individual's voice could be heard, and every act of compassion might one day help to heal the wounds of the past. Elena sat in a small, dimly lit room at the airport, a temporary haven that now served as both her refuge and her battleground. Outside, the steady, unyielding patter of rain against the windows echoed the relentless pounding of her heart. The events of the past hours still swirled around her mind: the fateful act on the flight, the echo of a sharp slap, and the cold words that had ended her career in an instant. Now, with mounting challenges pressing in on all sides, Elena could feel the weight of a system far more oppressive than she had ever imagined. In that quiet moment, the door creaked open, and Amir stepped in. His presence, calm yet charged with an unspoken urgency, filled the space with a steady determination. "Elena," he said softly, his voice carrying both empathy and resolve, "we need to talk. There's more going on here than what you've been told." He motioned for her to join him at a long table in the corner of the room, where the muted glow of a single overhead lamp cast long shadows on the walls. As they sat down, Amir's eyes searched hers, silently conveying the burden they now shared. "I've been gathering pieces of information," he began, "and it seems that you're firing this entire incident. It wasn't an isolated event. It's part of something much larger." His words hung heavy in the air, each one adding another layer to the already complex tapestry of injustice that had overtaken their lives. Before Elena could voice her questions, Layla, the determined reporter who had followed every twist of the earlier events, entered the room carrying a battered envelope and a small recorder. "I managed to get hold of some internal memos and even a recording from a closed board meeting," she announced, her tone a mix of excitement and apprehension. "There's evidence that suggests your termination wasn't just about discipline. It was a calculated move, a purge designed to silence voices like yours." Elena's breath caught in her throat as Layla's words sank in. The idea that her impulsive act had been twisted into a tool for corporate control felt like a betrayal of everything she had believed. "Silence our voices," she repeated, disbelief mingling with a spark of anger. "But I thought I was fighting for justice, for fairness." Amir leaned forward, his expression somber. "That's what makes it all the more insidious," he said quietly. "The higher-ups knew that acts of defiance would ignite change, and instead of listening, they chose to quash it before it could spread." The room fell into a heavy silence as the sound of rain intensified, each droplet a reminder of the cleansing, yet brutal, nature of truth. Then, almost as if on cue, the door opened again. A senior manager, one whose face Elena recognized from brief glances on the flight, stepped inside. His eyes darted nervously before he took a deep breath and approached the table. "I need to be clear about something," he said, his voice wavering with a mix of fear and resignation. "What you've experienced, all of it, was not just a lapse in judgment. It was orchestrated." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. The manager's words cut through the haze of her despair. "Orchestrated? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The manager hesitated, then pulled out a thick envelope and slid it across the table. "Inside, you'll find recordings and documents from a meeting held just days before your flight. Listen to this." He produced a small digital recorder and pressed play. A hushed, conspiratorial voice filled the room, a voice that spoke of strategies, of damage control, and of a plan to expel anyone who dared challenge the established order. As the recording played, Elena listened in stunned silence. The voices of board members, their words laced with calculated cruelty, admitted that the incident on the flight had been used as a pretext. "We need to send a clear message," one of them had said, "a message that defiance will not be tolerated, regardless of the cause." The revelation was like a jolt of electricity, igniting a surge of emotions that ranged from fury to a deep, gnawing sadness. This isn't just about me," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "It's about all of us who have been silenced." Amir nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor as he absorbed the weight of the revelation. "They planned it," he said, his voice low. They plan to use your incident to cover up years of discriminatory practices and to set an example for anyone else who might dare to speak up. Layla's fingers drummed on the table as she added, "This changes everything. We now have proof that the system is not just flawed, it's corrupt. And if we expose this, it could bring down an empire built on lies and prejudice." But even as hope began to kindle among the group, the unexpected twist of the revelation brought with it a new set of mounting challenges. The manager's confession, though shocking, came with a caveat. "You must understand," he continued, his tone shifting as he leaned in closer, "if this information gets out, it won't just affect you or even the entire flight crew. It could lead to a full-blown scandal, one that might endanger many lives, including your own." His warning was not lost on Elena. The stakes had just skyrocketed, and with them, the risks. In that fraught moment, Elena felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The betrayal of trust, the calculated nature of her firing, and now the undeniable evidence of systemic corruption, all converged into a single, overwhelming realization. She was not just a scapegoat for a single act of defiance. She was the unwilling catalyst for a much larger battle against an entrenched institution. Her thoughts raced as she weighed the mounting challenges ahead. The newfound evidence offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to bring about real change. Yet the consequences of exposing such deep-seated corruption were unknown. Elena knew that stepping into the light could mean facing legal battles, personal threats, and even the loss of those she held dear. The burden of this decision pressed down on her like the relentless rain outside. Amir reached out, placing a steady hand on hers. "Elena, you're stronger than you know," he said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty of the future. "This twist, as devastating as it is, gives us the power to fight back. We now have the proof we need to challenge the very core of their system." His words, laced with both compassion and determination, sparked something within her, a realization that her journey had taken an irrevocable turn. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the room shifted from despair to a cautious, burning resolve. Layla began outlining a plan to disseminate the evidence through trusted media channels, while Amir discussed strategies to mobilize support from sympathetic union members and even some insiders. Every conversation, every hushed plan shared between the trio, deepened Elena's understanding of the monumental challenge ahead. But with every plan, a new worry emerged. Elena was acutely aware that this was only the beginning of a long, treacherous path. The evidence they now possessed was a double-edged sword, capable of dismantling a corrupt empire, yet also capable of igniting a backlash that could leave them all vulnerable. The unexpected twist had altered the trajectory of her life in ways she had never foreseen. It was no longer just about her wrongful termination or the painful incident on the flight. It had become a battle for justice on a scale that threatened to engulf everyone involved. In that rain-soaked room, under the dim glow of a single lamp, Elena made a silent vow. Despite the mounting challenges, despite the risks, she would no longer be a victim. She would stand up, not only for herself, but for every voice that had been stifled by a system built on fear and indifference. The twist, though unexpected and terrifying, had given her a new purpose. It was the turning point that transformed her personal struggle into a fight for collective redemption. As the sound of rain mingled with the determined voices around her, Elena took a deep breath. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles and potential betrayals. Yet with the evidence in hand and allies by her side, she knew that this was a battle worth fighting, a battle that would challenge the very foundations of a corrupt institution and perhaps light the way toward a future where every individual's dignity was respected. Elena stood trembling in the center of the crowded terminal as the storm outside pounded the glass walls with relentless fury. It was a moment when every heartbeat counted, when every droplet of rain seemed to echo the courage of those who had gathered here. Today, the truth could no longer be buried. The internal memos, damning recordings, and hard evidence had been released to the world. The once impregnable facade of the airline was crumbling, and Elena, once shamed by her rash act, now became the unexpected spark for change. The air buzzed with raw energy as hundreds of passengers, flight attendants, and union members filled the terminal. Elena, Marcus, Amir, and Layla had taken their places near a makeshift podium hastily set up in the open space. Their eyes met, sharing the silent promise of solidarity. Elena took a deep breath and stepped forward into the glare of the floodlights, the sound of heavy rain mingling with murmurs of anticipation. I stand before you today, not as a symbol of error, but as a beacon of truth, she declared, her voice steady and clear despite the storm raging both outside and within her. For too long, our voices have been silenced by a system that values profit over people, order over empathy. Today we reclaim our dignity. Today we demand accountability. As her words washed over the crowd, the murmurs grew into an uproar of hope and determination. Marcus moved to a large digital screen mounted on a wall. With a few precise taps, the screen lit up with images of shadowy boardroom meetings, internal memos filled with cold calculations, and snippets of recorded conversations that revealed a ruthless strategy to quash dissent. Each image was a stark reminder of the injustice that had been allowed to thrive. The visuals stirred the hearts of all who saw them, painting a picture of a system built on hidden cruelty. Amir, his eyes reflecting years of quiet suffering and determination, stepped forward next. "This isn't just about one flight or one person," he said in a measured tone that cut through the tension. "It's about a culture that has long ignored the cries for justice from those who have been marginalized. We now have proof that our airline systematically silenced anyone who dared to question its practices." His words, firm and resolute, were met with applause and nods from the crowd, a collective acknowledgement of their shared struggle. The terminal transformed before their eyes into a battleground of truth and hope. The steady drumming of rain against the roof, the sharp, metallic scent of the polished floor, and the low hum of anxious conversations combined to create a palpable atmosphere of resistance. Layla, with her recorder capturing every word, ensured that every detail of this historic moment would be shared far beyond these walls. Then, as if summoned by the rising tide of defiance, a door at the far end of the terminal burst open. Uniformed security officers rushed in, their faces set in rigid lines of duty. Their arrival was a clear signal from the airline's higher-ups, a desperate attempt to regain control. For a heartbeat, the energy shifted, and a young officer, eyes filled with a flicker of uncertainty, stepped forward. His voice wavered as he declared, "You are all in violation of security protocols. This assembly is unauthorized." His words, meant to instill order, instead ignited further determination among those gathered. A voice from the crowd rose in defiance, clear and unwavering. "We have a right to be heard. We have a right to stand for what is just." The words bounced off the high ceilings, fueling the resolve of every person present. Elena's gaze met that of the young officer, and in that moment, she saw in him a reflection of internal conflict shared by so many, a struggle between following orders and embracing humanity. Stepping closer to him, Elena said, "You may be following orders, but orders cannot silence the truth. We will not be intimidated. Today, we stand together for justice, for every life affected by this corrupt system." Her words, gentle yet piercing, seemed to soften the officer's hard exterior for an instant, his eyes betraying a spark of empathy amidst his duty-bound fear. The tension in the terminal reached its peak as the storm outside intensified. Every face in the crowd reflected a mixture of anger, hope, and unyielding resolve. Suddenly, the large screen behind Marcus switched to a live feed showing protests unfolding in other cities, a mosaic of determined faces, raised banners, and impassioned cries for justice. The sight was breathtaking, a movement that was no longer confined to a single terminal but was spreading like wildfire, fueled by the collective will of people everywhere. In the midst of this chaos, a high-ranking airline executive appeared on a hastily arranged podium near the exit. His polished suit and rehearsed smile could not mask the tremor of uncertainty in his voice. "We are looking into these allegations," he began, but his words were drowned by the swelling chorus of the crowd. The people were not interested in platitudes or promises. They demanded accountability, change, and recognition of their human dignity. As the confrontation intensified, Elena felt a profound transformation within herself. The guilt and self-doubt that had haunted her since that fateful flight began to melt away under the pressure of this moment. She realized that her single act, impulsive and deeply flawed, had set in motion a force far greater than herself. What began as a moment of raw emotion had evolved into a movement that would not be silenced. With a final, steady gaze at the sea of determined faces, Elena raised her voice once more. "Today, we choose to stand on the right side of history. Our courage and our unity will be the force that dismantles this corrupt system. Let this day mark the beginning of a future where justice and compassion reign." Her words, like a rallying cry, sent shockwaves through the crowd. In that instant, the terminal became a living symbol of resistance, a place where the battle for truth was being fought with every heartbeat and every tear. The security officers, overwhelmed by the unyielding spirit of the people, began to retreat. The high-ranking official, his authority shattered, was quickly ushered away by his own staff. The terminal, once a sterile space of routine and order, had transformed into a sanctuary for those who dared to dream of a better world, a world where every individual was valued and every voice was heard. In the waning moments of the storm, as the rain softened to a gentle patter and a cautious calm began to settle, Elena felt a deep sense of resolution. The battle was far from over. The journey ahead would be laden with challenges and potential setbacks. Yet, in that decisive moment, the power of truth had prevailed. The echoes of this day would resonate in the corridors of power, sparking changes that would redefine the very nature of the system they had once feared. Under the fading light of a stormy afternoon, as the crowd slowly dispersed with a shared sense of purpose and hope, the legacy of that historic day was etched into every corner of the terminal. The truth, once hidden behind corporate lies, now shone with the brilliance of a new dawn. And as Elena looked out at the clearing sky, she knew that although her journey had been marred by mistakes and regret, it had also become the catalyst for a transformation that would light the path toward a fairer, more compassionate future. As the storm outside eased, a fragile calm spread over the terminal. The once chaotic space had transformed into a quiet gathering of determined souls, each carrying the weight of the day's tumultuous events. Elena stepped away from a makeshift podium, her eyes scanning the crowd that had slowly begun to disperse. Every face held traces of fatigue and resolve, a silent testimony to the struggle they had shared. She wandered through the now hushed corridors of the terminal, her thoughts as scattered as the light filtering through the rain-washed windows. The evidence of systemic injustice, the damning recordings, the internal memos, the whispered confessions, still reverberated in her mind. That barrage of truth had dismantled an empire of silence, yet had also left her with a mix of triumph and lingering regret. The impulsive act that had cost her dearly was now interwoven with the cause for which she had stood, transforming pain into a powerful call for change. Outside, the rain had tapered off, leaving a damp sheen on the pavement and a sky slowly clearing to reveal the first stars of the evening. Marcus, standing by the large windows overlooking the freshly cleared tarmac, appeared contemplative. His eyes, once filled with the sorrow of past prejudices and personal wounds, now shimmered with a quiet determination born of shared struggle. He had become more than a victim of the system. He was a symbol of resilience, his scars marking the journey toward a more compassionate future. Amir joined him at the window, his presence a steady anchor amid the unfolding uncertainty. The two men exchanged a silent understanding. The journey they had endured together was far from over. Amir's role had been that of a quiet guide, collecting truths and coordinating voices that refused to be silenced. Now, as he and Marcus looked out over a terminal that had witnessed revolution and reconciliation in the same day, they sensed that the seeds of change had taken root, even if the harvest was yet to come. Meanwhile, Layla's footsteps echoed in a nearby hallway as she hurried to compile her notes and recordings. Her diligent work had captured every nuance of the day, the passionate speeches, the secret meetings, the soft but resolute words of those who dared to dream of justice. She knew that her story would travel far beyond these walls, igniting conversations and perhaps inspiring more acts of courage in places where silence had reigned too long. Elena found a quiet corner near a row of benches, away from the lingering crowd and the echo of footsteps. Sitting down, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The terminal, once a sterile passageway for hurried travelers, had become a battleground for truth and transformation. Here, voices that had been suppressed for too long were finally heard, and every whispered hope was beginning to coalesce into a promise of reform. Her mind wandered back to the events of the day, the shocking confrontation on the flight, the cascade of revelations that followed, and the sudden, bitter blow of being fired. She remembered the sharp sound of her own voice as she declared her stand for what was right, and the tumult of emotions that followed. At that moment, the pain of her personal loss mingled with the exhilaration of sparking a movement. It was a delicate balance, the agony of a career abruptly ended and the fierce, burning hope that perhaps her actions could change a system built on indifference. In the soft glow of the terminal's fading lights, Elena realized that her journey was now defined by choices she had made and those she was yet to make. She had learned that the struggle for justice was not measured solely by grand gestures or explosive revelations, but by the quiet determination that persisted after the storm. Every word spoken in defiance, every tear shed in remorse, had contributed to a larger narrative, a narrative that embraced both sorrow and hope, defeat and triumph. A group of former colleagues and fellow flight attendants passed by, their expressions thoughtful and subdued. They exchanged hushed words of support, acknowledging the sacrifices they had all made in the pursuit of truth. One of them, a veteran attendant with eyes that had seen decades of unspoken suffering, stopped and looked at Elena. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the hardest choices lead us to the only path that makes us feel truly alive. Even when we lose, we gain something deeper, a spark that cannot be extinguished." Her words resonated with Elena, stirring memories of every moment when duty had collided with humanity, and reminding her that even in loss, there was the possibility of rebirth. As the night deepened, the terminal slowly emptied, leaving behind traces of the day's struggles in the form of discarded flyers, half-drunk cups of coffee, and the echo of passionate debates. Elena stepped outside, inhaling the cool, fresh air that carried the faint, earthy scent of rain-soaked pavement. The night sky, now clear and studded with stars, stretched endlessly above her. In that vast expanse, she saw both the closure of one chapter and the open-ended promise of another. Walking slowly along the deserted walkway, she reflected on the central conflict that had defined her journey, the tension between following rigid orders and the unyielding call of her heart. That conflict, so deeply personal and yet universally resonant, had driven her to a breaking point and, ultimately, to a moment of reckoning. She knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges and uncertainties. The struggle for systemic reform was not something that could be resolved in a single day or a single act of defiance. Yet, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, there was an undeniable sense of progress, a belief that every act of courage, no matter how small, could contribute to a broader legacy of change. In the distance, the low murmur of a protest began to swell once more, a gentle reminder that while the battle within the terminal had reached a tentative resolution, the larger fight for justice was ongoing. Elena paused and looked back toward the building, its windows now dark and silent. She felt neither regret nor elation, only a profound acceptance of the complexities that life presented. The resolution was not absolute, and the themes of the day, pain, hope, injustice, and redemption, remained woven into the fabric of her soul. In that reflective moment, Elena realized that closure did not necessarily mean a tidy end to every conflict. Rather, it was the space between chapters, a period of calm where one could gather strength, learn from the scars, and prepare for the uncertain yet promising future. The ambiguities of the day, the unspoken questions about what might come next, were all part of the journey. And in that journey, every choice, every act of defiance, and every quiet moment of introspection played a vital role. As the night wore on, Elena slowly made her way toward a small park near the terminal. Sitting on a weathered bench beneath a towering oak, she gazed upward at the night sky. The stars, shimmering like distant beacons, seemed to whisper that while some battles end, the quest for truth and justice is eternal. In that moment of solitude, she allowed herself to feel both the weight of the past and the stirring of new resolve, a recognition that while the central conflict of her life had found a measure of resolution, the underlying struggle would continue to shape her destiny. With a final, deep breath, Elena rose from the bench. The journey she had endured had transformed her in ways she could scarcely have imagined. Though the scars of the day would remain, so too would the lessons learned from every hardship and every victory. As she walked back toward the terminal, now quiet and dark, she carried with her the knowledge that the fight for a more compassionate world was not confined to a single moment. It was a continuum, a story of imperfect choices, enduring hope, and the quiet, persistent strength of the human spirit. In the gentle embrace of the night, Elena stepped forward into the unknown, her heart steady and her resolve unshaken. The echoes of the day would linger, inviting reflection and inspiring future acts of courage, as the legacy of that fateful day continued to unfold in the lives of all who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.